machine has a great selection of stitches to choose from. There's everything from straight, zigzag, blind hem, and so on for your basic sewing like fashions, home decor, quilting and crafting. But there are also stretch stitches for sewing stretchy fabric, satin stitches and decorative stitches for embellishment, even heirloom stitches and quilting stitches. There are also 6 different styles of buttonhole, and you can even sew on buttons. So let's see how to select a stitch on your machine. This is your LCD screen. It displays for you your selected stitch and the stitch width setting and stitch length setting. This button is for this number, and this button is for this number. This is your stitch length setting for longer or shorter stitches, and this is your stitch width setting, narrower or wider stitches. Let's select a stitch from our panel, and I'm going to use stitch number 54. It's the vine stitch. So I'm going to come up here to these buttons, and I'm going to press this button until I see the 5 in the screen. I'm going to press this button until I see the 4. So let's see what that looks like. And there's our vine stitch. When I come back to the screen, I can see this black line underneath the number, and this means that this is the default setting for my stitch. In the case of my vine stitch, if I want, I can make this stitch narrower by pressing my width button, and now it's set at 3.5. And let's see how that changes the look of the stitch. And there's my vine stitch at half the width of its original setting. Let's put it back to the default setting. Now let's change the length of the stitch. And here's our same stitch. The width has remained the same, but we shortened the stitch length and it has a whole new look. Now let's take a look at one of the most popular stitches that you'll use, which is the zigzag. On my panel, the zigzag I can see is stitch 03. So we're going to go to 0, 3. And here I can see the default setting is 5 millimeters for width and 2 millimeters for the length. So let's have a look at what that looks like. And there you have your basic zigzag stitch with a default setting of 5 millimeters for its width and 2 millimeters for its length. The zigzag is very popular, and you may want to adjust its length and/or width settings depending on your project. So let's bring the width down to about a 2 millimeter width. and see how that changes the look of the zigzag. So it's quite a bit narrower. Now let's try it at a 6mm width for contrast. Place all your threads under the presser foot and out to the back. And there it is at an even wider setting. Now let's try the zigzag. We'll go back to the default setting of 5mm, and let's bring the stitch length a little longer to a 3mm stitch length. This is going to make more distance between each stitch. So here the width has remained the same, but we have more distance between each of the zigzag stitches. And last, let's bring the stitch length down to about a 0.5. This is going to bring the stitches very close together, and this is quite popular when you want to do things like machine applique. And there you have your stitches very close together. Let's put the machine back to straight stitch, which is setting 0, 0. And one thing you'll notice here on the screen, again, is that the default setting is 3.5. That actually means your needle is in center needle position right now because there's no width on a straight stitch. But in straight stitch mode, you can use your width control buttons to move the position of the needle to the left or to the right. As you press your width button on the left side, it moves the needle position all the way to the left. As you press the button on the right, you can bring it back to the default setting of 3.5, which would put it back in center position, or keep going until you can't go any further, and that puts your needle in right needle position. Now let's take a look at a few of our decorative stitches. Select stitch number 15, which is called a crossed stitch. So that's number 15. We'll sew that at the default setting. This is a really pretty embellishment stitch. Let's try stitch number 52. See what that one looks like. It's a beautiful domino stitch. That's a really great one for embellishing as well. And let's try one last stitch. A really popular one is the honeycomb, and that's number 9. This is a really nice stretch stitch, and you can even use it for elastic insertion. So with all your stitches, experiment with your stitch length and your stitch width, different weights of thread, different colors and types of thread, and select the setting that's going to be just perfect for the project you're working on. For more information, a full instruction manual is available on the Singer website to view or download anytime.